Welcome to Expert Talks by Kalkine TV. I'm Sage. Today's guest is Mr. Michael Bassina from Piper Alderman, a partner for FinTech and Financial Services. And Piper Alderman is a prestigious and award-winning Australian law firm who announced earlier this year that they would accept payments in Bitcoin. And today's guest will share insights from the trending cryptocurrency space in relation to regulations and decentralised autonomous organisations, or DAOs, so this should be an interesting show. This year alone, 51 Piper Alderman lawyers have been recognised as the best in Australia with expertise covering 41 areas of law. Piper Alderman was also in the finals for 3 categories of the People Choice Awards 2021, and early in 2021, Piper Alderman gained another accolade from the Legal 500 for 10 areas of law. So very excited to be bringing you live today, Mr. Michael Bassina, a partner at Piper Alderman for the FinTech and Financial Services Division. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Well, we're honoured to have you, and we think it's important to raise awareness about DAOs and the emergence of cryptocurrency and blockchain into the mainstream. So we'd love to hear your insights on our Expert Talks show today. So, Michael, it's a fairly new concept, this idea of a decentralised board. How is leadership different in a DAO compared to traditional corporate boards? Is there a limit to the number of DAOs one can be in as well, please?
So DAOs are a brand new form of organisation, and people are coming together and creating them using blockchain technology and tokens to vote, as well as smart contracts to manage the processes by which the decisions are executed inside a DAO. So it's important to recognise that these are not a form of organising that was created by Parliament or pushed out as a particular kind of tax incentive. This is something that's originated organically, and that creates a whole set of really interesting problems, because this is not something where there are rules set out in a Corporations Act, for example. In a DAO, the rules are effectively written by the DAO itself, or when it is created, to say these are the rules of how it will be governed. So there are DAOs where there is a governing council. Synthetics is a good example of that, where there might be sort of an inner group of people elected to then make important decisions. There are DAOs that are reliant purely on the voting of the token holders within the DAO. So there's no theoretical limit to how many DAOs someone could participate in, but there is no traditional board in the sense of company boards. So it's very, very new, and most of the existing laws simply don't work around it. In fact, DAOs have no particular legal status at present, and we'll just have to see how they evolve and how governments respond. And Australia's been lucky enough to be leading in that space.
Yes, it's fantastic to hear that Australia is quite open to the evolution of the internet currencies, and it'll be interesting to see which way this goes. But also it'll be interesting to see how, whether waiting for, you know what I mean, how much weight each vote will have in the governance of these DAOs, you know, in regards to how much people have invested as well. That really makes my cogs and screws tick, and in regards to the egalitarian nature of them, it sounds wonderful in theory, and I wonder how well Synthetics DAO is going along. Would you happen to have any insight on how they're operating? Is it going well for Synthetics?
Well, that's certainly held up as one of the early examples, and that was a group that came out and did an ICO many years ago and then transitioned to a full DAO. And the founder, Kane Warwick, who lives in Sydney and is a very well-known figure in crypto Twitter, has stepped back from that position of being viewed as sort of the founder and leader to permit others to govern what's happening in the DAO and how the decisions will be made around that.
Very interesting. Thank you for those insights there, Michael. So how can AUSTRAC, who is a financial regulator, how can their guidelines aid to develop and regulate the future of further DAOs in Australia in relation to such things as Know Your Customer and Zero Knowledge ID, which I think are transactions synonymously still allowed in DAOs?
Well, the position is there's only regulation for those providing fiat currency to digital currency conversion services under AUSTRAC's jurisdiction. So AUSTRAC looks after anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing. That's their remit. As long as a DAO is not engaging in that kind of conversion service or another designated service, then they simply wouldn't have any registration or enrollment requirement with AUSTRAC. However, there is broad definitions of what constitutes international remittance, and that could get picked up there. But at the moment, I'm not aware of any specific guidance or any rules that are out there for AUSTRAC relating to DAOs specifically. What we do know is coming is the Bragg inquiry put out some really forward-thinking recommendations, including one of them was to consider whether Australia should implement a new company structure to accommodate DAOs. And that recommendation was accepted by the Treasurer, who just last week gave a speech indicating that that would be moving forward. That's quite world-leading. So if Australia manages to come through, and it may take 12 or 18 or 24 months, but to come forward with a new company structure, which is, I would imagine it would look very much like a highly automated company, perhaps without any kind of traditional looking board, but that could be world-leading in that space. And we would imagine as part of that consultation and legislative development, those issues around the pseudonymous nature of blockchains, which when you really get down to it are not particularly anonymous at all. Public blockchains are incredibly traceable and not very private, and increasingly we're seeing that function being offered by private companies that have been collecting all the data from public blockchains so that they can be analyzed and looked at more closely. You can identify someone from metadata if you have enough of it. But there's other companies who are also working around the know your customer space to say, well, if you can have an ID token which is attached to some kind of governance token in a DAO in a positive way, then you could have people opt in to be identified. I know in the Wyoming example, they have a LLC structure that can be used to operate a DAO, and wallet addresses are recognized as shareholders inside those special Wyoming LLC companies. Now, they're, of course, grappling with the issues of being the really first in the world to kind of bring out that corporate structure that ties into a DAO. And many of us are grateful for Wyoming because it lets us learn from what's worked and what could be done better, that hopefully we can bring into the Australian context and make sure that our regulations are fit for purpose and help keep jobs and businesses here.
Thank you, Michael. It's just so exciting to be part of the Australian financial infrastructure at the moment and seeing it evolve with Commonwealth Bank's big news about their pilot platform now enabling cryptocurrencies. It's pretty plain to see that things are moving forward and maybe that cryptocurrency will become more widely accepted. Do you think it's important for the regulators, however, during this time to take into consideration whether an organisation is crypto native, like Synthetix, before it can become a DAO, or do you think it should be open to any type of organisation?
I think it will be, that is a little bit of a chicken and egg question, because the nature of DAOs organically growing from people self-organising online. A great example of that was a couple of weeks ago. A group of people came together to form the Constitution DAO, which was trying to buy an early original copy, or from the first printing of the US Constitution. And they managed to raise $45 million in 1 week. So it's not so much whether someone is crypto native, but under the understanding of DAOs as they exist at the moment, they by definition are crypto native because they are using these smart contracts to run voting automatically and be able to seek the permission or consent of all of the token holders in a form of governance for pretty much any decision. So another way of thinking about it, I suppose, conceptually is companies at the moment appoint a board in part because shareholders don't have time to be and shouldn't be involved in day-to-day operations, and also it's completely impractical to take every decision to shareholders. However, in a DAO, there is the ability for near every decision that a business or organization wants to do to be put up for shareholder vote or have standing voting positions set by governance token holders, which is a really, really interesting experiment in what the boundaries are or what the directions are for an organization that could use a structure like that, as opposed to a company where once the director is appointed, they have a lot of obligations personally to the shareholders, but also a great deal of power. And we see that in the battle for boards in various listed entities and the complexity and litigation that arises from that. There could be some really interesting solutions that come out of DAOs that could be quite useful in the traditional corporate models as well.
Yes, well, it sounds similar to the companies or the corporations that allow their staff to have shares in the company. I think Bunnings does. WiseTech Global also offers their staff after 6 months some shares in the company. So it sounds like it's got an altruistic concept or idea behind it. I wonder if it will offer more liquidity to the people involved, the actual governance token holders. That'll be interesting to know.
I think that's a big benefit. There's a lot of most of the DAOs that have been created, the original teams that are involved are receiving tokens from their early participation in the project, and some projects even have a smart contract which is generating and releasing tokens over time. So definitely those who have been setting up these DAOs are benefiting greatly, particularly when the market price for these tokens, for whatever reason, jumps. So definitely in relation to that kind of liquidity issue is vastly better in the blockchain world in terms of knowing what something's worth. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's all good. Token prices might be shooting up because there's also technological locks that could be put on tokens to say, okay, the team's going to have this much percent of the governance tokens, but they're not going to have them for this period of time, or they're going to have automatic digital vesting over a period of time. That is just simply being done because people can do it, so they're using the smart contracts to enforce it, and that's in connection with this notion that some people have of code is law is the idea. Of course it's not, but when they set up a DAO this way that will operate, that everyone can see the code because it's all open source and see how it operates, then you can have certainty that if someone is an early participant and they're going to have X number of tokens vest over this period of time, everyone can see that that is going to happen, and there's no need for any kind of specific disclosure because it's all already there in the code, available for anyone who wants to have a look at it.
Great. Hopefully it will be that easily practiced, following the code ethically and wisely. So, Michael, we're not far away from Singapore. However, the UK and Singapore are offering licenses to Australian DCEs, and Singapore is proving to be a pulsing crypto hub these days. Do you think Australia is missing out on opportunities for expansion by not having these regulations established yet?
I think that's a very good question, and I think we are. I think that is now turned around with the Treasurer coming out last week and accepting the Bragg inquiry recommendation that we establish a market license regime for digital currency exchanges. I think there's a clear benefit to having that kind of licensing in place. Senator Hume has been, I think, reported as seeking a light touch, and I think certainly Senator Bragg wishes to have that approach as well. And while we have a Liberal Party moving that agenda forward, I would imagine it will be a fairly light touch approach. We have seen, and I've seen firsthand, and certainly submitted to the recent Senate inquiry, businesses have been leaving Australia to go to jurisdictions that have greater levels of certainty and very positively supportive regulators around what can or can't be done, particularly around what can be done, because the blockchain and crypto world is quite interesting in that a lot of people running new startups want to go and talk to regulators and say, is this okay? And regulators are not used to those kinds of discussions. They're far more used to an enforcement role and dealing with people who are actively looking at what can be done, and perhaps in some cases, what is technically legal, whether or not it meets the spirit of law is a bit different. And that's been an interesting point of friction, I think. So in the context of seeing people go offshore, losing jobs, losing investment, I think the Australian government has recognised that's a serious problem, and that the licensing that's proposed for digital currency exchanges should be able to help address that, as well as, we hope, addressing the debanking problems which plague the digital currency exchange industry, and also protecting consumers from issues of collapse. We've seen a couple of relatively high-profile collapsed exchanges over the last couple of years, and that's not something that anyone in the industry wants to see, and having some kind of licensing and oversight of digital currency exchanges will be very useful in the future, because there'll be some ongoing requirements around custody, in particular when people are holding other people's money is the touchstone for when there should be some government oversight. But as long as we're doing it in a light touch fashion, hopefully we can be competitive or better than the UK or Singaporean models, and keep more of the crypto and blockchain businesses here, which is a wonderful place to have them, both from a jobs and lifestyle perspective for them, but for the Australian economy as well.
Yes, it'd be great to see Australia keeping up with the global pace that this technology is evolving at. So how will central bank digital currencies, who seem to be popping up in the headlines every now and then, how will the central development of central bank digital currencies and capital gains tax impact the regulations that are being developed and surrounding the DAOs, please?
Look, capital gains tax in the recent government announcement has been sent to the Board of Taxation to give advice back to the government. There's really interesting issues around when a taxable event occurs. So when there's a series of transactions that are effectively between automated software-driven contracts, there's a very real question of, does every single time there be a small change in value of tokens as they move through multiple automated steps, create an obligation on a taxpayer to provide that reporting all the way down the line, or is there a way that can be dealt with from a tax position to make it simple and efficient? There's certainly a technological solution that is crying out to be considered, to have taxation dealt with by machines, because why not? And there's a lot of discussion, I think, and consideration to be had there. So there will be consultation over the next 6 months by the Board of Taxation around that before advice will go to the government. And that's going to be pretty important, I think, in connection with DAOs, because if they are recognised under a form of company structure here, then we're going to need to see how they're going to fit into the company tax regime, and at what point will revenue and other matters be recognised there, and how will GST go into it, and other tax obligations, things like stamp duty. On the central bank digital currency front, we seem to be a fair way away from what might be called a retail central bank digital currency, where you might see a digital Australian dollar that mums and dads could get hold of. The most exciting thing to come out recently is Project Atom, which involved several major banks and the Reserve Bank looking at syndicated loan settlement and issuance on a private Ethereum blockchain, which is currently done through complicated bespoke documents involving Reserve Bank and the banks. But this proof of concept showed that there was a vastly more efficient way of doing it, building on the Reserve Bank's previous investigations and research into using private installations of Ethereum to run other wholesale issuance. So I think Australia's moving along quite well in looking at what will be called a wholesale CBDC, that is, as between the Reserve Bank and commercial banks. But it might be a ways yet until we see something as between the commercial banks and mums and dads and small businesses and medium businesses that could use a fully digital Australian dollar. Luckily, we have things like the NPP and near instant transactions for a lot of payments. Mm-hmm. However, there'll be certain significant benefits from a retail CBDC, not the least of which is, as you rightly point out, it could be greater integration into DAOs. There could be really interesting financial products that could be offered out of smart contracts and automated ways of handling even smaller amounts of lending that could be completely automated. And going to that level of automation and efficiency for reporting simply means cost savings at the end of the day. A lot of people get very excited and think of blockchain as a mysterious world with near cult-like obsessives, but at the end of the day, it really represents a technology like the internet, which can connect a lot of people, reduce the costs of doing business, and automate a great deal of things which we would rather as a society be automated now.
Yes, true that. Welcome to the future. I think cryptocurrency's speaking out quite loudly through its users. So Michael, reaching the end of our discussion, and thank you so much for joining us and sharing your valuable insights. Do you think the establishment of DAOs will promote smart investments in Australia?
Absolutely. This is about reducing costs of doing business at the end of the day, as I just mentioned. Having, for anyone who's dealt with the corporate governance requirements around companies, will understand why there's a number of startups and registry companies and the like that offer interfaces which are currently dealing with old legacy systems around things like share certificates and how new shares are issued. There's a complicated series of paperwork that needs to be done all the time, and that creates an awful lot of work. Moving towards a world where that kind of work, which needs to be done right but can be done by a machine, simply means that you're talking about a form of organizing that's vastly cheaper. As I mentioned earlier, that example, who would set up a company and get $45 million raised into it in 1 week for a very specific purpose? Answer, no one under traditional company arrangements. However, these guys in America and girls did it in a DAO. So that ability to move really fast, subject to how the regulations come out, could be incredibly powerful for people setting up new ways of raising capital and having a radical form of transparency. Will it eliminate spivs and people trying to run scams and whatnot? No, but those exist at the moment with people trying to raise money into companies. Things will succeed or fail, and it's not government's job to try and pick the winners, but being able to have a radically transparent treasury in particular, because you can think about tokens in a DAO almost like being able to see into the bank accounts of a company that you've bought shares into, for want of a better analogy. Being able to see what's sitting there in funds and how it is moving is a really interesting level of transparency that current boards don't have to face outside of audited reports and other financial updates to the market. But a DAO has another interesting feature that's real time. So if a DAO wishes to raise funds for a particular purpose, everybody who's in it, based on how they're currently being used, can see how the funds are being deployed the second that they're being deployed and can see where they're going. So there's a really interesting aspect of surveillance by everyone, which may well see practically fraud and other matters eliminated for all practical purposes because of that oversight. And it creates an opportunity for automated oversight as well, so that those inside a DAO structure who are perhaps delegating functions for payments to be made and other things can have oversight of what is happening with payments and know the moment that it's happened. That kind of stuff is a lot more automatable. And those are very interesting because that, in relation to most blockchain, actually sits outside of the current banking system. So it's not something that would rely on that existing SWIFT network globally for making payments. Blockchain payments happen wherever you are in the world very, very quickly and resolve generally, if you're using something like blockchain or Bitcoin or Ethereum, within an hour will have finality. And it's simply, there's no other way to send that kind of value anywhere in the world at that speed with that level of surety to compare to the normal banking system. So I think that speeding up even that payment rails alone is incredible. Making the cost of it near zero relative to other options is also incredible. So having to just have those two improvements alone, almost by definition, is going to help improve how funds will be deployed and how fast they can be deployed and take advantage of opportunities that otherwise need a longer lead time. So I think I think the answer to your question is a resounding yes. Within 5 to 10 years, subject to regulation, we may see this become a very dominant form of corporate organisation.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for shedding light on what can be quite a murky area at the moment, people trying to understand something that seems like it's in a different universe almost, but it's becoming more and more real and more practically accessible. So Michael, really do appreciate your insights. I've noticed, however, security tokens are also coming more in the spotlight. That's a regulated space. Do you have anything to add on that and how it relates with the regulations being developed for DAOs, just before we close off?
Of course. So there's been a lot of talk about security tokens for the last, I think, 4 years, from when the early ICO days were 2017, 2018, and the Securities and Exchange Commission of America was saying, okay, a lot of these token offerings might be securities under US law. We've had Joe Longo before the Senate recently saying tokens aren't financial products in Australia and then qualifying it a bit. But the fundamental position seems to be there's certainly not been any kind of prosecutions in Australia for token issuers. And there's very high-profile people involved in DAOs here, and it seems that there hasn't been any huge issues around that. So a number of people, however, have been looking at how can we issue something which is very much a financial product but is completely tokenized, and that is a challenge. So I know of a number of projects that are trying to do that and are trying to essentially replicate what is permissible at law using blockchain tokens as a bit of an intermediary, but there are some challenges because of that traditional way. Open blockchain systems haven't had identification tied in by virtue of how they're designed, so that you wouldn't have everyone's identity attached to their transactions publicly. So a lot of those projects look at using what's called permissioned systems, which aren't open to the public to see everything, but there's generally someone in control over the top who can undo transactions and modify things along the way. But obviously, if that's being used, you can't use as easily the public blockchains for moving payments around in an integral way of that kind of system. But I think that we will see some forms of security tokens coming out that will be recognized. And it may be, if we have the regulations right and a corporate structure is set up for DAOs, then nearly by definition, the governance tokens being issued or any kind of ownership token being issued out of the DAO will probably be a security or considered a security. And that may well tie into the licensing around digital currency exchanges. I think we're going to see a merger or collision of traditional financial markets and a lot of digital currency, because it is simply so much more efficient to do these things on tokens and be able to have them moving around globally between different markets. You know, the global liquidity of Bitcoin itself is quite extraordinary to be able to move it around compared to the traditional financial system, which is reliant on country-based walled gardens, if you will, and then international agreements and reconciliations that take a lot of time and expense. The blockchain takes care of all of that reconciliation near instantly. And gives that trusted platform for transactions. So that's really exciting there.
Yes, absolutely. I think another Australian company, Mutual X, is quite prevalent in their emergence of how they can help the banks save money with just about 10 lines of smart contract code. Sort of interesting to see if they are able to provide more liquidity for many industries with that same type of code. Michael, the banks have been coming up in the news not for the best things recently, which is giving the argument for the emergence of this decentralised peer-to-peer transfers of money a lot more clout, wouldn't you agree? Any thoughts to share on that?
Well, that's a tricky one. We don't, until such time as people can get bank loans from a digital currency, which I don't think is going to happen in a short period of time. There's going to be a lot of space for the banks to be providing all the services that people like to have, and many people will want to have banking services in the traditional way. I think that what it does do is sharpen competition. If the banks are worried about foreign exchange, for example, being done on blockchain, and there's a number of companies which, for all intents, feel like you're just dealing with a normal forex company, but they're keeping the blockchain aspects under the hood so that they can deliver really low cost performance to their customers. That kind of competition sharpens the bank's view of things, and certainly when you see the Commonwealth Bank bringing out plans to give essentially all of their internet banking customers access to buy and sell digital currencies as well, and we're seeing a number of other businesses that are doing that, it's following the demand. They're not doing this simply to be innovative. They're doing it because customers want it. So I think you're right. There's a growing demand and interest in the space, and certainly it looks like the financial sector is, after quite a few years of perhaps ignoring it or shunning it, is finally moving around to say this is not going away. This is quite interesting, and once they get to know what's happening there and see that a lot of the traditional stories of it's used for money laundering and crime are just not at all true, because you can track people quite easily when they're committing crime on blockchains. You might have an issue with enforcing once you've located where they are because it's in a different country. However, that's the same problem if someone uses Western Union or other forms of moving money around. But I think that definitely the banks will feel that pressure of competition, and other sectors as well. You mentioned Immutable X, which is Immutable has a whole range of games they've been running for years that are based on almost collector cards, and the whole NFT boom around that, having digital collectibles. It's a brand new product, which many DAOs are issuing NFTs and being created in relation to NFTs. And this is something that's never been done before. And people say, it's a massive bubble. And you go, sure it is, but so is every market when it comes out. And we'll be really interested to see how even just that NFT space settles down to be a product that people want to buy in the future. And then you've got these amazing DAO setups for people who want to organize in a different way. It wouldn't surprise me if every sporting club in the country is running as some kind of DAO in the future, because the software is essentially free. That's another beautiful part of how these DAOs and a lot of blockchain systems work, is it's open source code that anyone can take and improve upon. So it's not a closed system where you can only buy a product from a company and you're reliant on that company to run the code. Every time someone rolls out a DAO with something new, anyone can take that code and make it better. And that model has worked really well in the internet via things like Apache Server and other matters. And when there's an error that gets discovered, it gets fixed really quickly. As we saw in the last week, Apache had a bug come out that was quite serious, but it gets addressed fast. And that brings together that incredible power of so many different bright minds working on and contributing to software that there's no charge for to use, and really businesses make money around the support and implementation of that software, which is itself a very powerful change in the business and operating models.
Thank you, Michael. Really do appreciate your insights today, and hopefully we'll see more of that bridge being built with the legacy financial system as we know it and this new emerging cryptocurrency and blockchain technology. I thank you again for your time amidst your busy schedule.
Thanks so much for having me on.
And if you've just joined us, we had a very interesting discussion with Mr. Michael Bessina, a partner from Piper Alderman for the FinTech and Financial Services Division. And if you do want to watch the full interview, please check it out at YouTube. It's Kalkine Media where you'll find it, and keep watching for more expert talks, live market updates. And as we say, till the next episode, stay apprised and invest wise with Kalkine.